So again, thank you all for coming. This is an important topic, and many people don't understand the connection between the inequities of public funding of public education and its connection to local communities, direct and indirect property tax. I will make a suggestion that you are sure to agree with, given the virus that's going around, and that is, I heard on TV just in the last 2 or 3 days that when you sneeze or cough, you're supposed to cover your mouth like this. No. Exactly. This is so 1920s. Thank you. Also, the events this evening are being distributed through Facebook Live, I think through this camera, meaning they are being distributed to others in the public beyond this sphere. Know also that Herb Moyer is here to record this event on video, and it will be broadcast on community TV. A show of hands, please, if you would. Is there anyone here from the town of Strafford School Board? Thank you. Any candidates for school board here? Okay, I don't see any hands. Same question of the town of Northwood. Anybody here from the school board? From the town of Northwood? How about Nottingham? Oh, okay. How about the superintendent's office? Is there a Zachary here? That's why I was puzzled by your son being named Zachary. How about Brianna, by some chance? Okay. And our state representative is here, Kurt Wolpe. Is Mike Harrington here? I don't see him. Okay. I will start the introduction. We've gone past the preliminaries. I have known Andrew and Amy for many years, from his role as attorney and my role as a court stenographer in the New Hampshire Superior Court system. His name echoed throughout the halls of courthouses all over the state, where he served as lead counsel in the Claremont school funding suit of the mid-1990s, which required our legislature to act to resolve the elusive issue of defining an adequate education for our students and how to equitably administer that adequate education. I see Dave out there, thank you. Among his other accolades, I wish to note that Andrew is recognized as most influential by the Concord Monitor and New Hampshire Public Radio. He is a Bill of Rights Award winner and Merrimack County Attorney of the Year. Andrew currently serves this district on a panel of 5 members known as our Executive Council, required by our New Hampshire Constitution to serve as a check on the power of the governor. Our form of government, state and federal, is replete with checks and balances. It frustrates some, but is supposed to guarantee that no one may rise to extraordinary power sufficient to overpower our political system. Andrew and Amy are regular attendees at our annual Blueberry Festival held each July at the Waldron store, and we genuinely look forward to their attendance and their voting on who among participants has brought with them the finished product of their secret blueberry recipes. That's around the 3rd week of July, as I remember. I think that's about right. Yeah. So without further hesitation, please welcome Andru Volinsky to Strafford's Hill Library.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Actually, I just go for the blueberry shrub, which is the fermented kind. So I'm Andru Volinsky. I'm on the Executive Council. I'm also running for governor. The issues we're going to talk about tonight are, to me, the most important issues in the governor's race, and the reason I'm running. If these issues had been addressed during any of the last 2.5 decades, I probably wouldn't be running. But they haven't, and as a consequence, the problems have grown worse almost each year. So my goal is to give you an understanding of how school funding works in New Hampshire. I have a series of slides. We'll talk for 15-20 minutes and then open it up for questions and comments, and we'll go wherever you want. Oh, Lynn's is too quick. Lynn's Jaco, who works on my campaign with me, everyone. Go back to the first one. So I just want to give credit to Berlin. Berlin high school students with their Save Our Schools banner marching in the parade in Berlin. Berlin is in some difficult straits, and we'll talk about that. Okay, next one. So I was the lead lawyer in the school funding cases. We went to the New Hampshire Supreme Court 10 different times, a group of volunteer lawyers suing the state to try and address the unfairness of how we fund our schools. If you distill all 10 cases down, this is what they were about. So every child in our state has a fundamental right. Oh, too quick. Every child in our state has a fundamental right to a state-funded quality education, K to 12. We're not talking about college and university, just K to 12. And because it's a state responsibility, the taxes to pay for K to 12 should be considered state taxes. And taxes in New Hampshire need to be uniform within the reach of the taxing district. So a municipal tax, everyone in your town gets the same tax rate. County tax, same thing. State tax should be uniform. But as you'll see, school taxes are not uniform in New Hampshire. They're anything but. Claremont cases. State's responsibility, state tax. This is what we have. We're using 2017-2018 data because not every data set has been updated to the current, and so we want to be consistent throughout the presentation. You'll notice that we put the local property tax and the statewide property tax in the same color. They're both local property taxes. This 11% is just given a different name. And the reason we consider it to be just a different piece of the local property tax is the statewide property tax. The bill is issued by your local town. You pay it to your local town, and then your local town gives that money to your local school district. And none of it goes to Concord. And none of it helps any town but yours. In a lot of places, there is the capacity to engage in what we would all call revenue sharing. That's set up not to allow for that. And we'll talk more about that. The statewide cash adequacy grant is about $3,700 per pupil. That's what the state considers to be its share of education funding. But you remember the prior slide, the court determined it's a state responsibility. So if the average cost of school per child is about $16,000, you can understand that $3,700 doesn't pay the bill. That's the problem with school funding in New Hampshire. New Hampshire has the lowest state contribution to paying for its K-12 schools of any state in the nation. New Hampshire is this bar right here. And if you gave the state credit for that statewide property tax, which it does not deserve, it would still be 47th. So the counterpart to being the lowest state contribution is that we're the highest dependence on the local property tax. What that means is if your property is real valuable in your school district, it's relatively easy to raise money for your schools. And if your property is not very valuable, it's very hard to raise money for your schools. So New Hampshire happens to be at this end. This one's Vermont. Because they're our neighbor, part of New England, same wage structure that we have, their costs are about the same, about $16,000. Vermont contributes $14,000 as a state. So $3,700. $14,000. And this blunts the difference in property values around the state because the state component is so significant. Massachusetts is sort of in the right here. The reason I mention them is Massachusetts, Vermont, and we all had similar education funding suits at the same time. And Massachusetts and Vermont essentially solved their problem within 2 or 3 years. And we're still waiting, 25 years later. So this is where we geek out. In order to understand school funding, you have to understand a concept called equalized valuation per pupil. It's a measure of the financial strength of the communities around the state. And all it is you take the property value of all the property in the community and you divide it by the number of kids. And when you divide it by the number of kids, you get a per pupil amount. And then you can compare large districts to small districts because you've then controlled for size. So I have this stick. I told Bob I would only go someplace with an 8-foot ceiling.
And I told them these ceiling tiles will push up.
So this is my equalized valuation per pupil school funding stick. And as you can see, I don't want to smack Bob here, it's kind of beat up because we've done more than 70 of these forums. And this piece sticks out the back of my truck. So all this is we drew proportional lines on the stick representing the different values of equalized valuation per pupil in representative communities around the state. You don't have to worry about these numbers because this is all proportional. And I'm just going to hold the stick this way so you can see it. The black line is the state average. So the community with the average financial strength has just over $1 million in property value against which it can levy a tax per child. So $1 million against which it can levy the tax. Down here at the bottom is Berlin. Berlin has $325,000. Claremont the red line is $400,000. So not even half the average. I was in Winchester on Sunday where they're having a real problem passing a budget. They will. They're the third lowest at about 443, so just above the red line. Just for perspective, Manchester is at 724. So Manchester has a structural problem. It's well below average. There's some people here from Rochester. Rochester is, I think, in the 600s. So it's about where the green dots are. all the way at the top, beyond where I can reach, is Portsmouth. Portsmouth has 2.6 million per child, but it's not the wealthiest. Moultonborough has 6.7 million, so that would be 3 sticks long. I just couldn't figure out how to fit it in my truck with Moultonborough. But it's not the wealthiest. Newington has $18 million in taxable property for each of the 80 children who go to school in Newington. And none of that value gets shared with any other community, even though you helped pay for the roads to get to Newington, you helped guarantee the Pease development bonds, all of that value stays in Newington. And Newington's one of the communities used to set the statewide education property tax rate. It's set at about $2. The entire school tax in Newington is $2.34. So none of the money from Newington gets shared. Moultonborough. Moultonborough has a school tax of $4 per thousand. So if you have a $200,000 home in Moultonborough, you pay $800 a year in school taxes. If you have a $200,000 home in Claremont, the tax is $25 and you pay $5,000. So 800, 5,000. So because I had to hold this sideways once, it struck me that the black line is really a starting line. And all the kids who go to school down here start at a disadvantage because it's harder for these communities to consistently raise the revenues necessary for their schools. And the communities out there have a great advantage. That's what our school funding system is. It's just a math problem. You take the value of your property, you multiply it times the tax rate, that gives you your revenue. So if your property is valued at 20 and you have a $2 tax rate, you make 40 bucks. If your property is only valued at $4, same tax rate, you raise 8. If you double your tax rate, you're at 16. But by doubling your tax rate, you become less competitive with the first community. So if there's a business that has the opportunity to expand in the low property value, high tax community, or in the neighboring community where the values are high but the taxes are very low, it's not hard to see where the business goes. And so this becomes a spiral. So I put on this table some local and representative equalized valuations, tax rates, and cost per pupil. So Alton isn't far, it's on the lake. That's one of the tricks to having high property values. On the lake, on the ocean, have a ski hill. Real high property values, so that's more than 2 times the state average. The tax rate as a consequence is not quite $8. The state average is $12.70. But with the cost per pupil on average being $16,000, they're able to raise more than the average, $20,000 per child. Strafford, where we are, is slightly below state average, slightly above state average in your tax rate. This is the local school. This is not Co-Brown. But you spend well below average for your local school. And my one editorial pitch, the research shows that if children don't read at grade level by 3rd grade, they're almost never going to catch up. So if you don't have enough money, you ought to triage it towards the lower grades. And most communities don't do that. Most put it in the high school. And it's really backwards. Manchester has the structural problem because its property isn't worth a lot. It also has a tax cap. It also has the union leader. And so that combination results in the lowest per pupil spending in the state. So what should be an economic driver for our state, Manchester? Businesses won't expand or move there because higher level employees won't live there because their schools are in trouble. So their schools are just about 4,000 below average in how much they spend per pupil. If you think of that on a 20-child classroom, that's 80,000. 80,000 for 13 years is what? Well, so it's $1 million less per class than the average community, let alone the Moultonborough or the Alton. And all these kids graduate at the same time. They all compete for college and jobs and military. And the whole system under Claremont is designed to allow children to compete with one another in what the court called the marketplace of ideas. And this is not a competitive system. So Moultonborough versus Pittsfield. We have with us tonight the superintendent from Pittsfield, John Freeman, who's contributed a great deal to my understanding of how all this works. So if you compare Moultonborough and Pittsfield, they're a similar sized district. They're both 500-600 kids. Is that right, John?
Right.
Tremendous difference in property value, huge difference in tax rate, big difference in spending. The other thing we did with Pittsfield, with John's help, Doug Hall, my colleague in this effort, and John Tobin, asked John to help us with an exercise. So we said, take your budget, which at the time was 18-19, so last year, a little over $10 million, and compare how much the state says you should spend for a constitutionally adequate education, which is 3,700 times the number of children. And that gives you this 2.7 figure. So we said to John, show us what you have to cut to get from 10 million to 2.7 million. That's what you have to cut. Get rid of science teachers, reduce elementary teachers by a third, cut all your paraprofessionals, eliminate purchase of equipment, technology, no English as a second language. And when you get through cutting all of that, you have to cut all of that too. And after you cut both pages, you're still not there. You get to 5.3 million instead of 2.7, and in order to get all the way here, you have to get rid of half your teachers, drive the class sizes up to 60 or so. And the other thing the research tells us, smaller class sizes, the better the educational opportunities. So this is exactly what you don't want to do. But this is what the state would have us do if we just relied on the state. So when we tried the Claremont cases, this problem was relatively limited. A dozen communities in the state were really in danger. now 77% of the kids, this whole side, live in communities with below average property values. So even though this is skewed to the really wealthy, 77% of the kids live this way. That's depressing in some ways, but it's also an opportunity to build coalitions. And that's what we need to do once there's a common understanding of how this works and how unfair it is. So, starting with Pittsfield, John Tobin, Doug Hall, and I started doing forums like this across the state. And we did it with the purpose of helping voters be prepared to question candidates for office. Because too often the candidates were getting into office and then voting against the interest of the community that sent them there. And we wanted to arm voters with this information. And as a result of what we did, and then going in and meeting with the leadership of the House, we were able to convince the House to adopt programs that stopped the bleeding. Not that made it fair, but just kept it from getting worse temporarily. So there was a big program called Stabilization Aid that helped the poorest districts. It had been cut 12% over 3 years. We got them to advocate for the restoration of that 12%. The Senate was behind the House. The Senate put up a package worth $70 million less. They eventually compromised, favoring the House version, but the Senate forced the House to reduce its version. And then it went to Governor Sununu, who vetoed it all. And then the governor signed it, and then went around to communities with these oversized checks, claiming that he had brought money to all these struggling communities. The money was restoration of the money they took away from you for 3 years. So it was your money that you got back, essentially. We asked that the legislature establish a commission to talk about how we address this. It's a little bit different than past commissions in that it has legislators and real people, no offense, on the commission, and some funding for staffing, which is different than before. And so we're hopeful that by the conclusion of its term, this commission will come up with some real suggestions to fix this. There's an issue about a big charter school grant. I'm going to hold on this unless people want me to go into it, and then we can go back to it in the Q&A. So some final thoughts, and then we'll open it up. First, this isn't just about children, and it isn't just about taxpayers. It's about business development broadly throughout our state. It's about development of affordable housing broadly throughout our state. There are places where communities are afraid to have affordable housing because it tends to bring younger families with children. And those children have a cost to be in the school system. That's not a recipe for success for a thriving state, to have communities afraid to bring more children in and more younger families. As I mentioned, the current problem is getting worse. It's clear the current system is not constitutional, and we've had this problem for 30 years, and we've lacked the leadership to address it, mostly because people running for office take what's called the pledge. The pledge is never to talk about or change our unfair tax system, and I'm the only candidate running for governor who won't take the pledge because of this. So let me pause here and try and answer questions, and then we can go back to slides if there are questions about them.
Wasn't the statewide property tax originally meant to be revenue sharing so that rich towns would send money to the state that would be shared with poorer districts? So what is the meaning of it now? Because I think that was found to be untenable by...
In theory, it was supposed to be, but the legislature never had the courage to set it at a rate where it would develop funds that could be shared. So it's always been set to raise about $563 million, or $363 million, sorry. And that number
it stays in the towns where it's raised.
Right.
So
At
what's
three,
the meaning of it? What's the meaning of it?
it was a political ploy.
Oh, gee.
Now, a statewide property tax isn't a bad way to address this problem, but you have to do a real one, and this one isn't. Bob had his hand up.
Years ago, and Judge Mole, who you know, I'm sure, introduced me to the name Augenblick.
Yeah.
Would you explain what that means?
So this is ancient history. It's from the mid-'80s. Claremont was actually the second effort to sue the state to address this problem. The first effort was in the early '80s, and the state quickly forced the communities suing to exhaust all their funds. They ran out of money. We took a different approach. We didn't get paid, so there wasn't any money to run out of. But the first ones were getting paid. They ran out of money. They asked for a settlement. And the settlement, ironically, negotiated with John Sununu, the then governor, was that the state would create a fund equal to 8% of the cost of education in the state at the time. And Professor John Augenblick was hired to design a formula that could distribute that 8%. Problem is the state never funded it beyond 4%. So 8% was never going to be enough, but half of not enough led to all the failures that provoked the second lawsuit where I was involved. Other questions? Yes?
You give the impression that the quality of the education is based on the amount spent. And I know you're not meaning to do that, but has anybody done a study to say what's the cost of a good education for an elementary school?
So the question is, I can hear it. Okay. I am intending to imply that money makes a difference. There is almost nothing that we do where more money spent reasonably isn't better than less money spent reasonably. We have the most, you can reach out and touch the school board members in this room. You know them all. They're not profligate spenders throwing your money out the window. You get to elect them every 2 years, 2 years or 3 years? 3 years. And you watch what they do. So we're not wasting money. The problem is some communities have a little bit of money and tax themselves to death to get there, and some communities raise large sums of money with almost no tax effort. The other thing I would add is the way we pay for special education services just makes us worse. So the state only contributes a small percentage of special ed costs. So when the child moves to your community who has significant special ed needs, first, you don't know the kid's moving there, so you can't really plan for it. And second, it blows up your budget. And the state is of little help. And so there should be a better mechanism, A, for a statewide pool that covers the cost of special ed. And second, all of the special ed requirements come initially from a federal law called the IDEA, which was passed with a promise that the federal government would contribute 40%, 40%, of the cost of special education services. And the federal government's never done more than 15 or 18%. So we need to go to our federal representatives and encourage them to keep their promise. But then we also need to go to the state and create a pool. I've been in communities where everyone knows who that family is that moved in and busted the budget. And they're struggling enough with a kid with severe disabilities, and now they're ostracized as a result of the financial impact. It's not right. Someone, go ahead, Bob.
What's the solution?
Everyone wants to go to the solution really quickly. First, people have to understand this, because everyone has been led to believe that we don't have a school funding problem. People brush it under the rug. So you start with education. Second, you need to design a program that deals with the crushing weight of the property tax on middle and working class families. Third, you need to make everyone pay their fair share. So I really actually do like Mitt Romney, but I pick on him in every one of these forums because he's got a $10 million estate on the lake in Moultonborough. And his $10 million estate pays $60,000 in taxes. That's it. So Sunday, when I was in Winchester, I said, let's sell off 90% of Mitt's estate. So now he's got a $1 million estate. And I asked the crowd, who's got a $1 million estate in the room? And nobody raised their hand. I said, the taxes on a $1 million estate in Wolfboro are $6,000. Who in the room pays more than $6,000 in school taxes? And like 3/4 of the people raised their hand. So Mitt's got to pay his fair share. Those are the kinds of, and it's got to be easy to understand, and people have to see that it's transparent so that it makes sense.
What's the likelihood that legislative body will understand and be willing to adapt? I mean, one would think that the wealthiest towns don't want to share with lesser groups. And the poorer communities, of course, would like relief. I mean, we go to a town meeting here, there's always a big hoot and holler about how big our school budget is compared to our tax budget, and why is it so high, and what's the school board doing to bring it down? I mean,
So school boards need to be really careful with how they spend money, but most of the costs aren't within their control. It's on the edges. First, I'm going to say the legislature's action or inaction will depend on who you elect to be governor, because the governor's got to push this. Second, 77% don't do well in this system. Only 23% do. That's how you change the legislature.
maybe we should start with new legislature with more money and better educated.
Different topic.
Room
That'll be
quiet.
tomorrow night's forum.
Can you talk a little bit about charter schools versus public schools? And
Yeah.
how they fit in?
Yep. So New Hampshire has what I call traditional public schools and charter schools. Charter schools have fewer regulations, more opportunity for innovation in theory. They only have to have 25% certified teachers. Public schools have to have 100% certified or close to certified teachers. There's a reason why you certify teachers, so they have the appropriate background to be teachers. There is room for charters to be innovative in certain areas. The problem in New Hampshire is that charter school money comes out of public school funding. So every time a student transfers from a public school to a charter, her $3,700 goes with her. And usually you don't have enough kids transferring so that you can materially change the cost structure. So the only thing that happens is the public school loses $3,700, and the only way for the public school to make it up is by increasing your property taxes to raise $3,700 more. So that's one problem. The legislature knows that no school district can operate a school for $3,700. So for the charters, they add $3,000 to it. So there's a charter school stipend. The current Commissioner of Education, Frank Edelblue, who I opposed, we'll just leave it there, secured a $46 million grant from Betsy DeVos's Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education. And he goes around the state complaining, why don't we accept this $46 million and double the amount of charter schools in the state? And the answer is, in order to accept the $46 million, you have to spend another $60 to $110 million in matching funds that we don't have. So what Frank is about is undermining public education in New Hampshire, and this is just the latest attempt by Frank Edelblue. Frank Edelblue is not a good Commissioner of Education. Yes, ma'am.
Are charter schools a way to get around the teachers' union?
Our charters, they could be. That's one of the methodologies, because you don't have to be certified. 1 in 4 has to be certified. Yes.
So just going back to the Claremont lawsuit, so that was the purpose of that to say that, you know, the system we have isn't working because we have such disparities in how much money different communities can raise. And then that essentially creates inadequacy in some areas of the state.
Yes.
Right? So then the solution was then that the legislature came up with this $3,700 or whatever, $3,600 per pupil, and said that that's adequacy.
It took them a couple of steps to get there.
Okay.
But
And-
essentially,
And that has never raised with like the cost of living or how it's
so the legislature figured out that it could raise about 800 million without changing the tax structure.
so that's where they came up with the adequacy.
Yeah.
They divided by the number of students and
Right.
came up with
It had
that.
nothing to
Okay.
do with the cost.
And how was that 800 million raised?
It's raised through, there's an education trust fund, which is kind of a bucket into which different streams of tax revenues go. So it comes from 20 different sources.
Including
But-
almost all the tobacco taxes, which don't go to prevent
Right, so it's-
all, you know, all other, they don't go to health things because it goes to education,
Right.
lottery, but,
right, so lottery, everyone sees the commercials, lottery pays for education. It's 2.5% of the cost of education. So that's it.
so essentially, when the legislature came up with that amount, and obviously I'm kind of fast forward and paraphrasing, but that was without creating a new statewide tax, because then somebody would have broken the pledge.
Yes.
Or the legislature, even if it had been a governor that was amenable to that, the legislature wouldn't have passed it.
Right.
Okay.
So
So
Governor
we're just
Sheehan-
trying to continue to do the same
Right.
thing year after year after year, and it's getting, we're at that 77% mark. Obviously, we're not making progress.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So Governor Sheehan took the pledge in her first 2 terms. She did not take it in her 3rd term because she said she wanted to put everything on the table. But by then, she had a very uncooperative legislature. And so even though she didn't take the pledge, there was no real opportunity. So let's stay with first-time questioners, and then we'll swing back there. Go ahead.
So what's the court's position on this? And it's
So there's a pending court case now that was instigated by the Conval School District. The trial judge looked at the current system and said it's unconstitutional, but then didn't order any specific relief. And now the state's even appealed that. It's really clear that it's unconstitutional. How you fix it is open to discussion. But courts are reluctant to take over democratic processes. And so they've been really hesitant to say, fix it this way. And that's why I ran for office, because the courts aren't going to get it done. It takes leadership in the legislature and executive branch. Yes?
So if the SWEP tax is used as it was intended, where we would be taxing Moultonborough on their property value and then sent back into the pool, would that make a difference?
Yes. Yeah, so it would be a revenue sharing system. But it's now set so low, there's never revenue to share. And that's intentional. Let's go over here, your first time. Yes.
I like to, charter schools are public schools in the state of New Hampshire, just with a different set of regulations that they have to follow, aren't they?
Charter schools are quasi-public.
Quasi-public schools. But they only get, even with the $3,000 stipend that they get in addition to the $3,700 inadequacy aid, hey, I know it's not adequate, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they get about 6,700, 7,000.
So for them to educate children, if it costs anywhere near what it costs in the not quasi-public schools,
Or public schools, we can call it that.
they must have to raise all that extra money themselves.
Well, there are two
So
tricks.
wouldn't that add the amount of money that's actually going to education?
So there are two tricks for charter schools. When a child goes to a charter school, the responsibility to provide special ed services remains with the sending district. So charters don't spend money on special ed. Charters don't spend money on busing the child from their neighborhood to the charter. Those happen to be very big, substantial costs in public school budgets. So they have two passes, and then they fundraise. And so some charters, there's one that Frank Edelblue cites all the time, the Academy of Sciences in Nashua, raises a couple $100,000 a year in fundraising. Nashua has almost a 60% free and reduced lunch rate. So Nashua Public School has a lot of kids in poverty. Nashua Academy has a 3% free and reduced lunch rate. So it's a very selective group with parents who are raising money themselves and from their friends to add to the educational services. So it's not a fair comparison. It's not a fair fight.
So Representative Wolper, did you vote to fund charter schools in New Hampshire?
I did.
Okay, next question? Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll come to
You
Bob.
said that the lottery pays 2%, but
2.5%.
what percentage of what the lottery raises goes to education?
2.5%. So, you're asking it a different way.
No, I'm
So
saying that of the total amount
yeah.
the lottery raises, their profit, what percentage goes to education?
So I think, I'm trying to remember the numbers, I think the gross revenues for the lottery are about $300 million, and 76 or 78 million drops to the bottom line, and then that 76 or 78 goes to education.
So
But since I'm sorry?
that would be all the money.
Yeah, all of what you would consider net profit in a business goes to education, but since we spend $3.2 billion on education, 76% is like 2.5% of the education spend. But the lottery does contribute all its extra money over.
All of it.
Yeah, but the commercials saying the lottery pays for education are a joke. Bob still have a question?
Yeah.
And then I'll come back to you.
I'm looking at a headline, Superior Court Judge rules New Hampshire's school funding system is unconstitutional,
Yeah.
which you've referred to. How long can the New Hampshire legislature continue to defy court rulings?
So far, it's 25 years. And here's what happens. School districts don't have money to sue the state. So you rely on teams of committed volunteer lawyers. We get an order from the court that says this is unconstitutional, fix it. the legislature puts into place a fix that's not going to work. But the courts say, give it a chance. So you got to wait 2 years, give it a chance, and then go back to court and prove it doesn't work either. And it's not a system that school districts can succeed in. Let me go to the gentleman right behind you, and then we'll come right to you.
So before Jean Shaheen declined to take the pledge, she actually vetoed a statewide income tax. I believe it was a flat 4% statewide income tax, which I blamed her for doing, being a Democrat. Would you support an income tax?
I think everything needs to be on the table. I don't think it's the best way. Because Mitt Romney, again, doesn't live here full-time and doesn't work here. So if all you have is an income tax, Mitt Romney's never going to pay it. And Mitt needs to pay his fair share.
So does that mean some sort of graduated property tax?
You really can't do graduated property taxes, but you can do revenue sharing the way the woman in the back suggested. You could do sales, you could do a mix of
In
things.
other states like Vermont, don't they have a higher property rate if it's your second or third home?
They do. And that's another alternative. Yes, you were patient.
So, having worked in different school systems as a guidance counselor and a school social worker, I've worked in wealthy ones like Portsmouth, where I could spend as much money, I could do as many things as I wanted to with those kids, to working in Farmington, which is the other end of the spectrum, where it was by the time the kids got to high school, I mean, the principal was encouraging them to drop out. Now, those kids that were in Farmington I see them occasionally. A lot of those kids are the kids that are the problems of the drug addicts and the kids that don't have jobs because they didn't have an adequate education. Now, the kids up in Portsmouth, and I worked in the alternative school, so I probably worked with the kids having the most trouble. Those kids were more successful than the kids in Farmington that were just average kids. Because Farmington is a low rent district, so the kids were already in poverty.
Yeah.
But they didn't have the money to help those kids.
Okay.
So it hurts society in general when that happens, because then we have unemployment because those people aren't employable because they're not educated enough. Then that becomes they don't have anything to do and they get drug addicted, and then we get all the problems that come with that. So it is more than just a school issue, it is a societal issue. And I've seen it happen.
Well said. My middle child is a social worker who just did 5 years as a high school social worker in Harlem. She's now in private practice, so she saw everything you're talking about. Other question or comment? We're close to wrapping up and letting everyone talk amongst them. Yeah.
So in terms of like Farmington and Pittsfield, there's a lot of communities that have, K through 12. Like in Strafford, we have a different situation where we have a tuition agreement with the high school, but can you just, like Berlin has a high school, elementary school, middle school, can you just talk about, does that have an impact? It seems to me, I was talking to someone the other day who went to high school in Raymond, and she said that she moved to Winnicott her senior year in Hampton, and Raymond had lost its accreditation. So, we have these issues around that, but I guess that's tangential, but even Raymond has like K through 12. So you've got a smaller town with a lower tax base, and then they also are educating kids across the entire lifespan, essentially.
So let me see if I can broaden your comment. There are opportunities for consolidation that could potentially save money. Usually administrative costs for a school district are about 8%, 6 to 8%, so it's not a big target. But when we did this forum in Berlin and someone raised a question about why doesn't Berlin join with its neighboring district, which is Gorham, Randolph, Shelburne, the Berlin mayor stood up and said, "Who will have us? We're teetering on the financial brink. If we fail, we'll take down Gorham, Randolph, Shelburne with us. And so they'll never join together. So this system is counterproductive if we're talking about incentivizing consolidation for economies of scale and administrative savings. It doesn't help. It makes it worse. And just to editorialize, breaking up 3-member SAUs to form single-member SAUs is under discussion here in this community. Generally not a good idea, because you make the economy of scale issue worse. Now you have 3 small districts instead of 1 larger district. Just my 2 cents. Last question. Go ahead, Bob.
If, let's say I got a parking ticket and I ignored it for 30 years, how successful do you think I would be in ignoring it?
I assume that's a rhetorical question.
It is.
Okay, so we'll just let that hang out there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.